Hi, this is Young Cho, and I'm gonna analyze the poem "The Ballad of the Landlord" by Langston Hughes. The poem is from the Sojust website. Before I start, I'm gonna read out the poem "The Ballad of the Landlord." Landlord, landlord, my roof has sprung a leak. Don't you remember I told you about it way last week? Landlord, landlord, these steps is broken down. When you come up yourself, it's a wonder you don't fall down. $10 you say I owe you. $10 you say is due. Well, that's $10 more than I'll pay you till you fix this house up new. What, you gonna get eviction orders? You're gonna cut off my heat? You're gonna take my furniture and throw it in the street? You are taking high and mighty. Talk until you get through. You ain't gonna be able to say a word if I land my fist on you. Police, police, come and get this man. He's trying to ruin the government and overturn the land. Copper's whistle, patrol bell, arrest, precinct station, iron cell, headlines in press. Man threatens landlord. Tenants held no bail. Judge gives Negro 90 days in county jail. Why I choose the resource. The Ballad of the Landlord by Langston Hughes depicts the theme of the racism in New York during the 1940s. The speaker is basically black tenants, and he is inherently well aware of the racism in his society that he is involved in. So he's not surprised when nothing is getting done in the way of repairs to his home by his landlord. The white landlord has power, and he recognizes the control is from his skin color. So he wants to make more money off from his tenants, and he refuses to do the repairs that are needed, which is his duty as a landlord. And finally, he calls the police and sending his tenants to the prison. The speakers in prison seems to be undoubtful and absolute, even the reason is absurd. The, this depicts the truth and history of 1940s in New York, and we need to learn the poem is to learn how the racism has been in the past. Because the history repeats itself, we should learn more about this poem to avoid repeating the same problem and absurdity in the present and future. So for the introduction and what I learned from the poem, the first two stanzas begins by talking to speaker's landlord. The speaker tells the landlord that his roof is leaking and he asks for someone to repair. And the speaker already asked about this issue once, but nothing really was happened to resolve the problem by the landlord. The front steps also broken down, and the speaker talks about it since he did not really address. But the landlord required money from the speaker without any of the repairs that the speaker asked for before. So this was the only absurdity that the speaker disagreed with the landlord. Instead of this, the speaker was pretty loyal to the landlord. The speaker's tone is important when he talks to his landlord because this shows the tenant's attitude in the 1940s New York. That's what the author really want to stress about it. So the speaker showed no anger or frustrations, and the speaker was deferential and suggesting to repairs to the stairs for the landlord's safety, not for the speaker's safety. This represents the tenant's typical behavior in the 1940s that the author really wanted to emphasize. And the poem portrays the whole attitude of each positions. There are two main characters from the poem. The speaker can be the representative of the tenants' general mindsets in 1940s. Tenants are usually black people, and they are programmed not to feel anger even though they are confronted any absurdity. And even the speaker is loyal to his landlords and caring about the landlord's safety, even though he did not get any benefits from the landlord. And the landlord from the poem represents the landowner's general mindset is 1940s and usually white people, and the author really want to stress the exploiting tenants, and by asking for money without finishing his duty. And eventually, the landlord uh, sent the speaker in jail when he does not give any money to the landlord. That's the absurdity that this author really want to emphasize, and that's what I learned from the poem. And for the technology integrations, how the technology is used to store documents. The Ballad of the Landlord by Langston Hughes is gonna be an historical poem that is in the website Sojas. And there are other historical speeches, songs, poetries, and other documents about human rights and social justice. And there are many online websites that collect such memorable documents, such as webinars, recordings from the YouTube and TEDs and so on. Such kind of documents can be a good tools for to store such historical documents in order to show to the descendants. And not only the documents from the past, but also from the present can be stored, such as podcasts, books, novels, social medias. They are sharing documents and sharing the what the author really thought are thinking, and that's how the documents are stored and shown and shared. And the documents edited by can be edited by passing down orally. So all the thoughts held in centuries will be educated by the parents and teachers, which are the basic educators to children's. And they repeat the educations to next generations and adding up the all the data, get all the data from the educator. So including the thinking of belief of the current generations. And what's gonna be the benefits when storing such documents for students, kids, dissidents? So there are going to be two benefits. The first benefit would be the age of the audience. Usually the audience are kids to teenagers, and they are really in a good time that can shape their ideology of individual for the whole life. So talking about and discussing about anything about documents, historical documents, will make them grow up and develop their ideology. And the second benefit would be the self-study. Students voluntarily choose what to learn through assignments and research. And this is important because from the Teacher's Guide to Tech 2021, Gonzalez states that many of these tools allow students to create their own study materials like flashcards creators, access video tutorials that can supplement what they learn in class, collaborate with other students outside of the class time, and download materials when they need them rather than wait until they are in class. So creating their own study materials and accessing video tutorials on their own will make them learn more about it. And that's the way they are developing their ideology as mentioned before. So to give um, to give appropriate benefit to students, educator must know how to choose appropriate resource for children. So the educators must keep in mind what to teach before choosing the resource. If the educator choose this poem as a resource, the educator must keep in mind about racism before talking about in class. And most important thing is that educator must sustain the neutrality. So because the teacher's gonna give information, but the information should be in the middle. In order to make critical thinking and decisions must be made by students in order to become an independent learner. And for the highlights of the Ballad of the Landlord, in my perspective, the highlight's gonna be the last three stanzas. The last three stanzas can be in a format of tercets. That means they are containing 3 lines each. And these last three stanzas talks about what happened in the next in the short, concise words. And it's talking about the black man went to prison and given 90 days in jails. And this last three stanzas highlights the absurdity that the black tenants literally did nothing other than asking for repairs. that's the highlight of the poem Ballad of the Landlord. And I'm going to talk about the pitfalls of the poem. So there might be three pitfalls, and there are going to be possibility of planting the idea of racism, because it's talking about racism, and the audience or students, they are pretty young to make their idea own, so they may justify and follow the racism of the poem because it happened in the past. So the educators must keep in mind of not planning the idea of racism to students. And the second pitfall is going to be possibility of stereotypes of black and white people. So from the poem, it's talking about that black people are petty and poor tenants, and white people are selfish, exploiting tenants. But there are so many exceptions, and that's not right for educating students. The life is much more complex than this, and racism is also more complex issue than just black and white. So, but this poem may make students to see in black and white. So educators must keep in mind of students not seeing any kind of racism issues in black and white side of view. And the third pitfall is gonna be the form of poems. So because students are basically thinking that have a stereotype of poem that they're boring and difficult, but this poem is not really difficult and does not have any professional words. So I think this poem is right, but they might have the resistance toward the form of the poem. And in my opinion, for the Ballad of the Landlord, it's overall good example of portraying the society in 1940s. And there are three things that the Ballad of the Landlord are talking about. The first one is the race issue. It's gonna be the class difference between tenants and the landlord, and because it direct cause the problems. Because it's the direct cause of the problem. And the economy inequality is gonna be the second thing that the poem is talking about. So it's gonna be uneven power dynamics between the tenants and the landlord. And the third thing is gonna be the liberal arts. The poem has a rhyme of juxtaposing snappy musical sound elements, and it has a story of absurdity and upsetting. So this ironical comparison between the story and the rhyme stresses the sad topic of the racism and economy inequality. So I'm going to talk about the three main discussion questions. The first question is, what does the landlord symbolize in the Ballad of the Landlord besides just a white person in 1940s? The second question is going to be, between the tenant and the landlord, who do you think is the main character of the Ballad of the Landlord? And the third would be, do you think the Ballad of the Landlord is appropriate as a learning tool for kids in elementary school? And this is the two references that I used for this PowerPoints, and thank you for listening to my lecture.